Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lehigh University's College of Health Colloquium series. I'm so pleased that you've joined us. I'm Beth Dolan, the Interim Dean of the College of Health. The Colloquium series this fall celebrates the Vince and Ellen Forlenza Endowed Faculty Chair in Health Innovation and Technology, a crucial faculty position in the College of Health for which we are currently conducting a search. Our focus this fall on health innovation and technology encourages our community at Lehigh and beyond to consider the ways in which innovation and technology can positively affect the health outcomes of populations. This fall, we are collaborating for the first time with Lehigh University's Baker Institute for Entrepreneurship, Creativity, and Innovation. All Lehigh faculty, staff, and students are invited to the Design Thinking workshop, dubbed the Opportunity Room, or OR, which will be held on Friday, December 3rd from 12 to 1:30. In that workshop, we'll have the opportunity to talk with one another about ideas or problems that the three speakers in our series have identified. And these are ideas or problems that inspire us or spark something in us that makes us want to devote our talent and time to solve them. We will post a registration link in the chat or an email so that you can contact someone and register for the OR workshop. We've had a great lineup of speakers this fall. So just to recap briefly, in September, we hosted Dr. Karen Murphy, Executive Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer and Founding Director of the Steele Institute for Health Innovation at Geisinger Health Network. She had an inspiring conversation about leadership and digital innovation in health with Lisa Getzler, the Director of Lehigh's Baker Institute. In October, we are fortunate to learn from Dr. Rebecca Jacobson, president of the startup Astrada Inc., a digital healthcare company specializing in natural language processing for quality and value-based care. And in conversation with Dr. Jacobson was Vince Forlenza. And today, on World AIDS Day, we very appropriately welcome Dr. Stephen Tang, president and CEO of OraSure Technologies, a leader in the development, manufacture, and distribution of rapid diagnostic tests, including the first rapid HIV test for professional and home use, and a rapid COVID test. With characteristic modesty, Dr. Tang has asked me not to drone on about his accomplishments, and I assure you that they are many and that they span the academic, industry, civic, nonprofit, and government sectors. I'll honor his request, but I can't resist sharing that he earned his MS and PhD in biochemical engineering at Lehigh. I will add that OraSure, the company that Dr. Tang has led for more than a decade, was developed at the Ben Franklin Institute on Lehigh's campus and continues to be our neighbor here in Bethlehem. Today's colloquium will take the form of a fireside chat between Dr. Tang and my colleague, Dr. Anand Jagota, Associate Dean for Research in the College of Health and Professor of and Founding Chair of the Bioengineering Program, as well as Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. Dr. Jagota is an esteemed researcher in the areas of biomaterials, biomechanics, and nanobiotechnology, as well as a beloved teacher, mentor, and colleague. Dr. Jagota has come with questions of his own, but invites all of you to join the conversation. So please enter your questions into the Q&A at any time, and we'll do our best to get to most of them. So thank you so much, and sit back and enjoy this fireside chat over Zoom.
Thank you so much, Beth. And welcome, Steve. Thanks so much for taking the time. All we're missing is a real fireside, but we'll imagine it. I hope all of you got the chance to relax over the Thanksgiving. We certainly fired up our fireplace. So as Beth introduced, there's the different format, and I've sort of broken up 4 general themes, and we'll take a short break after those if people have questions answered. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. So that's the format, and a discussion with Steve and myself speaking less, I hope, and Steve more. And the context is, as Beth mentioned, the search for a health innovation and technology chair that the Forlenzas have endowed. And specifically, we expect the title that Steve gave to our discussion today is Developing Innovative Health Diagnostics to improve population health, and we'll certainly spend time on that. But I wanted to kick things off by just looking at the title of the chair, Health, Innovation, and Technology, and parse it a little bit to see how we understand these terms. So let's begin with health. And Steve, I have a question for you to get started. I always wonder, health versus disease. I mean, we have the National Institutes of Health. Are they actually National Institutes of Disease, or maybe even National Institutes of Absence of Disease? And this is, to me, beyond just words. I think there's a different response one has to disease versus health. And so how do you think about that, Steve?
Well, first of all, Anand, it's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate Beth's introduction. I appreciate the brevity of her introduction as well. It gives us more time to talk about these really meaty, weighty, lofty topics. So what is health? That's a big question. And I think everybody is aware of that primarily here in the US, the healthcare system is more about disease. It's more about treating you when you're not well. And I think clearly that definition needs to be challenged if we really want to make progress in understanding all the dimensions of what makes us healthy. OraSure has a way of looking at that, and because we're a diagnostic company, one of our themes is we're going to help you know more about what's in you, what's on you, and what's around you. And maybe that's one dimension of health that we can explore. What do those things mean, and how does who you are and what's inside you and what's around you contribute to your overall health? And there are certainly links between health and wellness and your environment that need to be explored. The other thing which I'll say is the pandemic is clearly shattered our world in many ways. But one of the interesting things is that dimensions that we wouldn't have ordinarily thought about coming together, the notion of medicine, public health, and population health. Okay, those meant different things before the pandemic, and essentially you could talk about medicine without talking about public health or population health by and large. But now that's just no longer possible. You look around you, and everything that has to do with safety and health considerations around COVID-19 have everything to do with your individual health, but they also have to do with community health, broader public health, and population health, because there's no place in the world that is safe from COVID. So I think this definition of health has been evolving. And before the pandemic, I would have completely bought into the notion that it's not about sickness, it's about wellness as well. But now we're talking about far-reaching, components and conclusions. You've probably heard this as a mantra elsewhere, but this notion of nobody is safe and healthy until everyone's safe and healthy. That's clearly what's going on in the pandemic right now. So, we are 5 or 6 days removed from the identification of what's now called the Omicron variant, right? And already people are wondering whether this variant is already here in the US, which communities it's going to affect, and what are going to be the consequences of that. I can't remember a time in my life where we thought about the velocity between infection in one part of the world affecting the other, so strongly as it is today. So this is a hot button topic today, and what's the difference here to health? And I think that it's a clear opportunity for all of us, students, faculties, researchers at Lehigh, to look at this in its many dimensions, systematically and holistically.
Thanks, Steve. So let's chat a little bit about the other two words in health, innovation, and technology. And some of my colleagues have suggested that innovation here is a qualifier for technology. But I'd like to raise a couple of questions to you. Technology means different things. At least I've grown through an era where it meant one thing, and now it means Now you say technology, it means information technology more than anything. But to me, especially with the qualifier innovation, it means not just information technology, but devices or sensing or diagnostics. How do you understand the word technology, and how does it relate to what you do?
Well, I have to go back to economics 101, right? There are two factor inputs. One is labor, one is technology, in very, very simple terms, right? So if it's not labor, it must be technology, right? And so by that, it means, what are you doing to enable humans to accomplish things better, more efficiently, more effectively, transformatively, et cetera. So I think those concepts are linked, innovation and technology, but I don't think they're completely overlapping. Innovation can come at a human level. Innovation can come at the labor level. All of us that are experiencing aspects of working at home while living at home know that innovation had to happen during the pandemic in order to keep commerce moving and jobs sustaining when we couldn't come into an office building or a factory or a laboratory or anywhere else to work. So I think innovation is transcendent. I think the technology is a part of innovation, but I don't think they're necessarily the same. And innovation can mean little things. It's you know, a manufacturing technician working at OraSure, learning how to use a piece of machinery differently, more effectively, and teaching others. I mean, that's a very simple model. It's transformation of the supply chain. It's blockchain technology. It's all these things that you can imagine. So, you know, already I've started to say things about technology that link innovation, but I also believe there's a human element that we have to account for in that.
I agree. I mean, with my training and experience, the word innovation, my mind goes to innovating materials and devices, and but clearly, as you mentioned, the term is much broader than that. Improving processes in a hospital setting, for example, it could be very innovative. So I appreciate the breadth that you assigned to it.
Well, I think also, Anand, you know, I'm very sensitive to the fact that in today's world of information technology, there's a term that was coined many years ago, now probably 20 years ago, that you know, the Lehigh undergraduate students of today are, by definition, digital natives. In other words, they've spent their entire lives around digital devices and smartphones and PCs and tablets, et cetera. You and I, unfortunately, are digital immigrants. So we arrived at this location of technology without it being in our background. And I think back on, because I'm a grandfather now, so I think back on the things that I see my 1.5-year-old grandson doing, and think back of when I was that young, and our worlds are completely different. So I don't pretend to know the impact of technology because I haven't been immersed in it as long as your students have. So I think there's a paradigm shift as well, where, you know, those of us that have been more experienced in the world are subject to disruption by those that understand digital tools and technology better than we do. And in some respect, that's very threatening. In some respect, that's very exciting. I don't think we've ever been in a situation where, you know, a younger generation could overwhelm the practices of an older generation so easily because of technology.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we historically label ages by materials. There's the copper age and the some call last century the silicon age. But now now we have information, which is a supposedly insubstantial thing, but we're in the information age. Along with, it seems to me, the other moving force for novelty in our age is biotechnology. And I'm going to bring us back a little later onto the connection between the two. These are a two-spectrum within technology at two ends of the spectrum. But they come together certainly, I suppose, in what you do and what OraSure does. I mean biotechnology and information technology.
Well, that is for sure. I think that the mega trends in life sciences and biotechnology and the mega trends in information technology are already converging, and there's going to be much more convergence over time. OraSure has businesses in durable products, analog products, diagnostics that are meant to be used once and disposed of. Collection kits, the same. But we also have a business in bioinformatics, looking at levels of information, genomic information, microbiomic information, metatranschromic information, and looking at those layers and seeing what the effects are around each other. That's where what's in you, what's on you, what's around you, thinking where it comes from. So machine learning is very important because you're talking about, analyzing terabytes of information and trying to find, for instance, the type and quantity of each microbe that's in a sample that either comes from your gut or your skin, and characterize it correctly at that moment in time. And then trying to figure out the effect of those microbial populations on function. In other words, how are they metabolizing their sources of food and substrates, and what's the result of doing so, and what is the result on the host of doing so. So these are very complex, intricate biochemical processes that ultimately have to be validated by data science. So it all comes together in OraSure's world, and I think we'll be seeing much more of that as macro and mega trends through academic research, applied research, and commercial research, and ultimately innovations in new products and services.
Great. So some people, just to be a little naysayers, some people say that these modern AI tools, machine learning, data analytics, they're so powerful they actually take the human intuition out of the loop, and in that sense are counter innovative. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm just posing it as a question as to how to ask you how you think about it.
Well, anytime you have a nascent technology, there is both a notion of fear and greed involved with it, right? Back when I was a graduate student in Lehigh, beginning in 1982, okay, the biotechnology industry was just a concept. In fact, I remember when I was applying to colleges when I graduated in 1978, which seems like forever right now. One of the things that the chemistry department always reminded students of when they were trying to determine whether they should be biology majors or chemistry majors, chemistry professors would say, well, just keep in mind, there's no such thing as a biology industry. And back in that time, they were right. Right now, they are dead wrong. So, to make decisions based on where things are moving is very important for all of us. So early days in biotechnology, everybody was concerned about the threat of Frankenstein organisms and out of control public policy, and whether this should be left in the hands of scientists. How can we trust scientists, for God's sake? Clearly that notion has gotten worse over time, right? And it's the same for AI and machine learning and robotics today. I mean, people are concerned because it's easier to see the science fiction than the science sometimes behind it. But it's all not smooth sailing. One of the I'll share a conversation I had with my brother, who's an electrical engineer, early in the COVID-19 pandemic. His notion was that AI could be used to essentially capture your voice and determine whether you had COVID-19. Okay, if you think about that, that's an interesting notion. And if we could somehow, distinguish the signal from the noise in whatever you're trying to analyze and correlate it well with people that are infected with COVID-19, perhaps you could have a diagnostic that wasn't biological in nature, it was purely data-driven. Well, it turns out that just hasn't happened. Okay, that hasn't happened in the world of AI and data. And one of the reasons it hasn't happened is because along the way, we scientists figured out that this disease, COVID-19, was troublesome because when you were infectious, you were asymptomatic, right? And so it didn't really matter what your voice sounded like. If you didn't have any symptoms, you would still go out and infect other people. All right, so that's a limitation. So we have to learn these things, I think, as we go along. There's not any sort of, a priori way to look at this definitively without actually going out and getting empirical information and doing experiences. So, I as a Lehigh trained engineer, I think at least I have that grounding in terms of letting the science and the data, lead us to solutions. But I think I think it's a good thing from an innovation perspective to think about all these possibilities, even though some of them might not work out. And clearly, technology has enabled a lot more free-ranging ideas about innovation than ever before, I think, in the world's history.
Great. So I propose we take just a quick break, not a break, but just a stop to see if there are any questions. And before I go on and to the next theme, and we don't have any questions in the Q&A. I'm looking at the chat, nothing there. So I'll just hold for a minute in case anybody has a question at this point.
I'm not sure if, hi Anand, this is Beth. There are two questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you can't see them, I could read them.
Oh, could you please just?
Sure. So we have a question. How do you think the financial incentives in the healthcare system need to change in order to compel organizations within it to respond to population health? Hospitals routinely talk about researching or reaching upstream, but in most countries, they are still largely rewarded for treating people once they get sick. Thank you.
That's a great big question. So let me try to break it down a little bit here. So OraSure comes from the world of diagnostics, and so in just to break down the field of life sciences, there are basically three sectors. There are diagnostics, there are therapeutics, and there are devices. Okay, and generally speaking, most of the expense goes to therapeutics. Devices and diagnostics are not the area of intense focus in the industry. And the reason is quite simple. This goes to the issue of economics, is that when you hear about blockbusters in the life science industry, generally speaking, they're talking about drugs and they're talking about therapeutics. They're not talking about devices, and they're clearly not talking about diagnostics. And in fact, if you had talked to the CEOs of diagnostic companies before the COVID-19 pandemic, and you asked them if they'd ever see in their lifetime a blockbuster diagnostic, that is a product diagnostic that sells over $1 billion per year, okay, they probably would have said that's kind of crazy, okay? They couldn't imagine a widespread diagnostic to do that. So the diagnostics, I think, are important. And one of the gem statistics that I carry around with me is that diagnostics account for around 2% of the total healthcare spending around the world, and yet they drive 60 to 70% of the decisions that are made. Okay, so they're the linchpin in the cost of the industry overall. Okay, so that's just one slice away of looking at that. But if we're going to get healthcare costs under control collectively, I think it's pretty clear that we need to align who's paying for it with who's getting the treatment, and follow people over lifetimes. That's the only way to do it. The way we have it set up right now, if you have healthcare coverage here in the US, you're probably not paying for most of it. And so the decisions you're making are not cost-effective decisions. They're ones that have to do with your out-of-pocket costs and what your insurer will pay for it. So I think that clearly needs to be looked at and reformed on a global basis. The other thing which is very clear is that even though we may not care what's going on in other parts of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that basically we're going to be affected by it. And so we have to be able to link the elements of local healthcare and local access to healthcare and the economics there to the global stage and what that means to everybody around the world. You see that now with statistics that talk about percent vaccination rates in other countries and around the world. You see that in infectious rates, but these are terms that were never really a focus here in the US in particular, but now they are. So that's a long set of answers to your questions. If you have something else you want to follow on in that, I'm happy to address it also, but this is a key issue. I mean, if it's going to change, then you do need to follow the money. You need to follow how things are paid for, who's making the profit and why.
That's great. Thank you so much. There's one more question in the bank here. So at the beginning of the talk, there was a brief discussion of health versus disease and the need to focus on health. On a somewhat related note, what are your thoughts on using longevity or anti-aging research or biomarkers for longevity, et cetera, for the development of future diagnostics?
Well, I'm fond of living for a long time. I think a lot of people are also. And I think that, you know, the number of people that are reaching, you know, retirement age who can expect to live well beyond what their fathers and mothers lived to has never been, you know, has never been more apparent or easier than today. So a focus on longevity and a focus on aging as a part of health and wellness is a really great idea. And in fact, if you look at the demographics of aging around the world, I think you would conclude it's a very lucrative segment for the healthcare industry to look at. So as a commercial endeavor, I think it's great. And so I would suggest behind that, there needs to be research done on a proprietary basis and in academia to make sure we understand the genetic link to longevity. But as I said in my mantra earlier, what's in you, what's on you, or what's around you, the determinants of health have also to do with environment. They have to do with the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the people you associated with, the climates, et cetera. And that's where, you know, you have to account for climate change as well. So none of the big issues of our time can get ignored if you're going to study longevity overall. And so I think that's a very lucrative field and a very very important one for academic research as well.
Thanks, Steve. So let's go on. Let's get back to what we entitled the session, Developing Innovative Health Diagnostics to Improve Population Health. And I'd like to start with a very simple question. If you could just let us and the others know, what does OraSure do actually?
Well, you can wander down to First Street where we're located and take a look around our buildings. Most of those buildings now are manufacturing sites or R&D sites. And so what OraSure has done throughout its history is develop novel diagnostic and sample collection products to enable what we call effortless diagnostics. And what that means that it's easy for you to perform on yourself as a self-test to diagnose diseases like HIV, HCV, Ebola, COVID-19 now. So it's the configuration and the ease of use that we engineer into those diagnostic tools that's important. On the sample collection side, you know, we're probably best known for, you know, this device, which if you do a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com genetic test, you simply spit into this vial, and this vial has a solution in it, proprietary solution in it that preserves the DNA in your saliva for many years at room temperature. So I would say that these are not the sexiest parts of the life science industry, but these days they have turned out to be very useful in what we're trying to do. Part of what we do, I think, is take common sense and good science and put them together to make useful products. And when I say useful products, I don't mean the highest technology products. And this has come out, I think, in the COVID-19 environment, where we had to learn about what the differences are between PCR testing and rapid antigen testing, for example. Okay. In early days, you may recall that people said, well, I want a PCR test because it's the most accurate, right? Well, it's the most accurate, but it also isn't available in a rapid format. In other words, by and large, when you go get a PCR test, it goes to a lab and they send you results, sometimes within a day, sometimes within a week. Okay. Meanwhile, as I said before, COVID-19 is transmitted while you're asymptomatic, right? And so you may have encountered other people, or you may be infectious in your own right between the time that you take the test and know the result. So the speed of getting the result, the frequency of testing yourself is much more important than the accuracy of the result itself. So these are practical trade-offs in technology that we make in developing our products. And we did so with HIV primarily because we saw an opportunity to help eradicate HIV in countries that had very little healthcare infrastructure. So if you think about sub-Saharan Africa, there are not Quest or LabCorp sites around sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so the things that we are used to to go get your blood drawn and get your blood tests, those are not available in most of the world. Most of the world does public health by a public health worker putting our product in their backpacks and walking door to door and offering them to people to take and figure out whether they have HIV. So that sort of mindset about the practicality of healthcare for public health and population health, that becomes very important. So we're involved in a lot of those issues today in diagnosing infectious disease, but also looking at the contribution of your genomics, the microbiome in your gut or in your skin or elsewhere in your body, what the effect of the outside world might have on you, and bringing that information together to create a layered approach to knowledge and understanding of your health and wellness and disease state. So that's a long answer, but we, for a very small company, we do a lot of things at the same time.
So you've emphasized that the creation of point-of-care diagnostics or home self-diagnostics is revolutionary, especially in underserved environments like sub-Saharan Africa. But surely it also has an impact even in prosperous nations like ours. I mean, so my question to you is, well, how does it change things even in a prosperous country if you can move the diagnostics from the lab to the doctor's office to your home?
Well, that is something that I think the pandemic has helped create in terms of opportunity. So I think even if you're used to routinely going to Quest or LabCorp to get a blood test, during the pandemic, nobody wanted to be around anybody, right? And so that was not the best way to do things. And in order to see your physician, telemedicine opened up as a possibility rather than going to doctor's office. So I think we have learned how to be in a healthcare infrastructure today that's more like sub-Saharan Africa than it was before the pandemic. So I think we're getting used to to healthcare being delivered in different ways. So the notion of self-tests or at-home tests that give you results, fairly soon, let's say in our case, a half an hour for COVID-19, is very appealing because you can do it in the privacy of your own home. You don't have to expose yourself to others. And, if you and the people around you, your loved ones, your family, the people you live with are doing the same thing, then what it really does bring is peace of mind that you're all working together to keep each other well. Okay, that sense of connectedness and health around the community didn't really exist before. Okay, because the things that we would worry about typically this time of the year and beginning of December would be, I don't feel well. Is it a cold or is it the flu? Well, neither of those is particularly deadly, Neither of those are particularly deadly to older people. Clearly not as much as COVID-19. So it really wasn't part of the way we thought about the world. Now with COVID-19, I think we're going to think differently about what self-testing and telemedicine and things like that mean to us.
So we have a question in Q&A which is related. Let me read that out now. The question is, how do you weigh the convenience of at-home self-testing versus the risk of data quality due to people failing to adhere, say, to the collection instructions?
Well, this is something that's part of the FDA approval process. Okay, you have to conduct clinical trials that test people's ability to actually use your device correctly. Okay, and so therefore, the ease of use becomes part of the assurance that you're getting a quality result. So if to conduct the test is so complicated that you're not sure you're doing it right, that will lead to your own doubt about the validity of the result. And so what we try to do in our products is engineer the ease of use into the performance of the device. And we've tested that technology in many parts of the world, in many languages around the world, and even in communities where there's a high illiteracy rate. So people can't even read the instructions, all right? So they either have to be shown by pictures or a demonstration how to use the device correctly. So, obviously that's not foolproof, and, nothing about diagnostics is foolproof. There are going to be a defined number of false positives and false negatives, regardless of what device or technology you're going to be using. But in a self-test environment, you accept those as part of the way the device works. One of the reasons that we have two devices in each test kit that we sell today in drugstores and elsewhere is that the way we're suggesting people use it is to take one test, and obviously if you're positive, then isolate, and sometimes people will go get another test just to confirm that. But generally speaking, the incidence of false positives is very low. What we're more concerned about is the incidence of false negatives. So if you get a negative test, the instructions on the box say, test yourself again in 24 to 36 hours. And if you are again negative, then you have virtual statistical assurance that you are in fact negative. Okay, so it's the duplicity of the test that helps you with the statistical dispersion. So it's a long way of saying we engineer ease of use into the devices as a way of assuring people that they're using the device correctly. FDA does their job to sort out and weed out products that don't meet their specifications. And that's the level of assurance that comes in the market.
So we're well into discussing actually your process of creating diagnostics, so I wanted to steer the conversation a little bit about the innovation environment and ecosystem within OraSure. And, for a company of your size and ambition and the area that it works in, innovation is essential. So how do you maintain or set up an innovation ecosystem? What are its characteristics?
Well, so innovation, from my perspective, and for this I rely on past experiences. Doing research as a graduate student at Lehigh was certainly part of that experience. But the other stops that I've had in my career as a general management consultant to many innovative companies, running a startup that was devoted towards hydrogen storage for fuel cells. And then, I was led Olympus America's diagnostic life science business here in Lehigh Valley. Then ran the University City Science Center, which is a innovation ecosystem in its own right, for 10 years before coming to OraSure. So one of the tenets of innovation, which I think is spot on, is promoted by a friend of mine, Victor Wong, who wrote a book called The Rainforest. And what he contends is that you should, if you're trying to cultivate an innovation ecosystem, then you should treat it like a rainforest. In other words, you should try to make it as lush as possible, so that all the elements of in creatures can grow and coexist. So what you shouldn't try to do is engineer the system per se to get a particular result. And what that means, if you've ever been in or near a rainforest or researched it, is there are some very scary creatures in a rainforest. And just the same, there are going to be some very scary creatures in an innovation ecosystem. You're going to get people with crazy ideas. You're going to get, tarantulas and snakes and other kinds of spiders that you're going to have to contend with. But if you're really going to embrace innovation, you're going to need to accept that those are elements in your ecosystem that you need to be cultivating. So, when you're running a company, particularly a public company, that's a bit of a challenge, right? Because you're trying to get everybody to align and campaign resources in a particular area. But the realm of innovation, which is equally important, is the one that's divergent, right? It's the one that is messy and sloppy and doesn't really come together, but it's cultivating a sense of and a culture that endorses that eventually gets the most of the innovation that of the people that you're working with. The other thing I'd say about that is that it all doesn't have to be within the four walls of your company. Okay, these are not just employees. What you should be doing is encouraging your employees to cultivate their own innovation networks, those who have PhDs know that there's a certain lineage within the academic environment, which you can always tap into if you've cultivated that well over your career. So the important thing is not to be seen as the person who has all the answers in their own brain, but knows how to access it elsewhere. So to me, those are all elements that are important. And you think about an innovation ecosystem. You want people that are not only smart and creative, but also can network effectively, that can cultivate relationships for a lifetime, that connect them with other people, when they get into certain problem-solving situations, they know where to go. And that really does increase the velocity of problem-solving and commercial activity that eventually makes a company money.
So you made an interesting point about the fact that, especially in today's world, it was different a few decades ago when a lot of innovation happened in these major companies, but today a lot of it happens in small companies, and they can't do everything, so they have to collaborate but keep at an arm's distance other small companies. How do you balance the need for innovation outside, but with the fact that you need to protect your proprietary products and information?
Well, that's a very, very important balance, right? So you need to have people that understand that distinction, where there are certain boundaries about what you can disclose in order to get the information you need. Okay, and I think that's a world we all live in, because we're all trying to, in some way, protect our own ideas or our own property in some way, shape, or form. But in this world where information is widely available through the internet and other sources, I think you can do more of that today than you certainly could 20, 30, 40 years ago. So that's important. If you look at the way that disruptive technology has come to markets, in other words, what is it that the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks, of the world did in their early days, right? It's fascinating because it largely mirrors how other disruptive technologies a century ago worked. And so part of, I guess, what I'm trying to encourage is for students and people in academia to understand history. In other words, what's the history of how these technologies and companies actually came into being? That includes people like Asa Packer. I mean, what did Asa Packer do to transform the railroad industry and mining industry to what it is that serves his time well? What is it that the Steve Jobs and the Mark Zuckerbergs and people like that have done to transform their industries? But the entrepreneurial mindset and the entrepreneurial ventures is a key part of it, and that's a distinction I think that is largely an American phenomenon. The ability to amass capital in a way that can promote your ideas and advance your company from a small company to a very large company in a very short amount of time, that's all vitally important. So, business configurations go in and out of favor. You saw in the past month, General Electric is going to break up into several companies. Johnson & Johnson is going to break up into several companies, right? And so there's an ebbing and flowing of big companies and the creation of shareholder value that gets discussed all the time. But you're absolutely right, Anand, in saying that if you want to work in an innovative environment and you want to work in one where you can grow your career, you can grow your experiences rapidly, go to a small entrepreneurial venture or go to a mid-sized company, you're more likely to find that as an experience than you will in a very large company.
Thanks. There are a couple of related questions in the Q&A. The first one is, how does the federal government foster innovation? And perhaps we can add to it, how should it foster innovation? What does the government, say the FDA or the NIH, do well to foster innovation, and what are the areas for improvement?
Right. So I am a big proponent that federal governments should step in for market failures. Okay, you saw this in many ways during financial crises in this century. We saw, in and around the financial collapse, back in 2008, 2009. You saw it during the pandemic. Those are important roles for the government to play. But one of the market failures, of course, is that if you simply relied on private industry for innovation, they would only do things that were very self-serving. Okay, and back to my comment about innovation ecosystems. Once you try to cultivate the ecosystem to do just one thing, it's no longer innovative. Okay, ecosystems have to live and breathe and grow and be messy in many ways. So the federal government can help that by funding basic research and applied research. Okay, and that's something that's clearly been debated for many years, but I do think that's a significant role. And that's why every year when the federal budget is set and you look at the amount of NIH funding or NSF funding, you look at programs like ARPA-E, which is the energy equivalent of advanced research. Now looks like there's going to be an ARPA within the health area, ARPA-H. Those are all things I think we should be embracing. These are clear differentiators within the United States in terms of our focus on these types of technologies. The spin-off ability from these technologies to create startups, venture-backed firms is tremendous. I think you've seen that with technologies like CAR-T, gene and cell therapies. These are all transformative. So I think that is a role that the government should play. Having said that, I'm also a fan of public-private partnerships. And so I think that there ought to be more collaboration between the private sector and the public sector to define domains. One of the things that the government always gets accused of or scrutinized about is picking winners. Okay, by and large, we don't want the federal government picking winners. What we want is the federal government to conduct fair horse races. Okay, for which the winners in a commercial setting can be best identified and selected under pressure. That to me sounds like a ripe area for better public-private cooperation. And you've seen these through over the time with organizations like Sementech, which it was a consortium of private industry and public entities to develop the semiconductor industry. So there are ways I think that the government and private industry can work much more closely together. Right now, in this deeply divided political environment, I don't have great optimism for that approach, but I do think that that's going to be key for our future.
Well, I don't know if you would agree that the vaccine development was a great example of the public-private partnership.
Oh, that's for sure. I think that, you know, the amount of funding that went into that certainly created a vaccine faster than anybody could have predicted. So that's a learning we should take and expand and scale up in other areas.
So the second question in the Q&A is, what advice would you give to aspiring innovators and entrepreneurs, whether they're students or more seasoned professionals?
Oh, we may have to have another session just on that topic, but my basic advice is prepare to fail and embrace it, okay? Because if you're doing something truly innovative, you are by nature in a high risk, high reward setting. And just the laws of physics will tell you that high risk, high reward is going to have failings. And so I think that it's always easier to look back once you've been successful and broken through to commercial stage as a company or as with a product, to look back on it and say, you know, you knew more than you did when you actually knew it. But what happens is that innovation is very messy, and that sometimes there are fits and starts, sometimes there are depths of despair that you have to go through to actually break through. So it's actually a gut check, I think, on your own sort of, you know, personal sensibilities. I mean, you have to be willing to deal with that if you're going to be an innovator and going to be working in an innovative company. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you should ignore the analytical side of your brain and looking at a situation and calculating for your own purposes whether you think it's too high risk or not. But by definition, I'll take it on face value. You know, if you want to be an innovator, you want to be an entrepreneur, I think you have to learn a lot about yourself and your own sense of risk tolerance and your own sense of stubbornness and determination to succeed.
So if I can ask a related question, you made the point that if you're going to play the innovation game, you've got to be prepared to fail maybe several times before you succeed. Now, from your position, where you're managing groups of people like that, I imagine you have to distinguish between the really good people who just happen to fail versus not so good. How do you just draw that distinction? And it's something you have to do, right?
It's something you have to do, but it's not a perfect science. It's under some circumstances, the most talented people will still fail. And under certain circumstances, the less talented people will succeed. Some of it is luck, some of it is timing. Those are all sort of externalities or intangibles that you can't really control. So we get in this argument all the time, right? When this is particularly in Washington right now, whether, you know, people have entertained the notion of a billionaire's tax, right? And some people say, well, you know, these people are so extraordinarily talented. Why would you want to penalize them? And I accept that and I understand that. But the truth of the matter is, most of these folks are also lucky. All right, they were lucky to have the right idea at the right time and the right circumstances. And I don't know that I don't know that you can make an argument for not taxing that. Okay, so there are certain circumstances, I think, where success or failure are not determined by pure talent; they're determined by circumstances. So, you know, when you're running a company, you try not to get failure on a critical path, okay, because that dead ends you. What you try to do is create a branch set of decision points so that at any given time you're hedging against, you know, success and failure. It's particularly challenging, of course, when you're doing that under time pressure, right? So in our case, for our IntelliSwab COVID-19 product, we're racing to the market. We're trying to get this product widely available. We're trying to scale manufacturing in ways that we've never we've never done before as a company. All those things, I think, lead to calculated risks and, trying to put people in a position to succeed rather than fail. Not everybody has the risk orientation everywhere in the company. You really don't want your manufacturing technicians to be high risk, high reward people. You want them to be very steady and observant about what they're doing and do things in a highly repeatable way. So there are different roles around the company where I think you define risk and innovation and success and failure very, very differently.
So let's halt briefly. It's nearly the top of the hour in case there are other questions and answers. And we have a little more time after this. I don't see any in the Q&A. So perhaps we can go on. Steve, I wanted to, we've discussed already quite a bit about the role of small, medium-sized companies where innovation happens, large companies. But I'd like to pose a question about the, in the innovation ecosystem, the relative roles of universities, small, medium-sized companies, and the large companies. Again, to take our current example, we see Pfizer as a large company relies on BioNTech as a medium, small-sized company. So it seems that the model has shifted to a certain type of innovation happening in universities and small companies, and the big companies taking it to market, as it were. Any comments on that?
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, that's absolutely true, Anand. I think that if you look at the way that, let's say, pharmaceutical companies, big pharmaceutical companies today operate, right? They are as likely to develop a product internally as they are to go out and look at small, medium-sized companies and look for them to reach certain milestones in either product development or clinical development, and then buy that company or partner with that company and use the significant resources that they have, whether they're Pfizer, Merck, or anybody else, to essentially help speed the clinical development, the product development, the scale up, et cetera. So it's a different relationship than existed probably 30 years ago, where there's much more done in-house. Okay. In OraSure's world, there's even there are some examples of even more interesting disruptive elements. And so one of our biggest customers is 23andMe, right? That's the device that I held up before. So if you go get your subscribe to 23andMe, they'll send you a box with our saliva collection device in it. And you will spit in the tube, you'll send the tube back. You won't send it to 23andMe. You'll send it to a lab who does an analysis, who sends the data to 23andMe. Then 23andMe will send you an email to go to their website where your data will be portrayed. That's a very clever business model because they never actually touch anything, right? Mm-hmm. All they do is they interact with you on a screen, and everything else is done sort of by someone else, including OraSure, who's making the devices, right? They are very cleverly now in the drug development business. So what do they do? They essentially sold 20% of their company back in 2018 or so to GlaxoSmithKline. And GlaxoSmithKline uses their data and mines their data for information for drug development. Okay, so this is the new Silicon Valley phenomenon. And remember that Anne Wojcicki, who's the CEO of 23andMe, came from Google, right? So she's a data person through and through. And you see more and more of this, not just in the pharmaceutical industry, but you see it in other durable goods. You know, Apple has its design on being a car company, right? People like Elon Musk, who had his roots in PayPal, right? Now has a juggernaut is in space exploration, right? So you see people that have data orientation now trying to apply that data to actual physical goods, whether the physical goods are drugs or cars or rocket ships, et cetera. So those are sort of the data side of the industry and the innovation driving the actual products themselves. not the reverse. Not durable goods or hard goods companies that are looking for data to make an impact on their products. It's a very different paradigm.
So you've made a really strong case for the convergence of biotechnology, molecular biology, data science, population health. How do you train somebody to handle all these things, especially at the undergraduate level? Or are we looking for experts who will come together and work in teams?
Gosh, I'm glad this is your job, not mine. That's a very tricky thing when the world is moving so quickly in terms of different paradigms and different interdisciplinary overlaps, right? When I was at CEO of the Science Center, Eduardo Glant was on my board. He was the Dean of Engineering at Penn. He came up with an offering in the past probably 5 years. There's a major at Penn called social media engineering. Okay. Wow. I mean, where did that come from? That's the confluence of data science and sociology, essentially, right? So these multiple combinations where there were seemingly no overlaps in history are now becoming more apparent. One of the interesting exercises might be to do a simulation of the various disciplines that exist at Lehigh today and look for crazy overlaps. Okay, these are the spiders and the snakes of the innovation ecosystem that may be quite interesting to look at overlaps and see how those confluences of disciplines might come together to create a new point of view on a particular domain. In this case, health would be a great domain since it's so wide sweeping and widespread. So I still am a great believer. My undergraduate degree is in chemistry from William and Mary, so I'm the proud recipient of a liberal arts education. When I came to Lehigh, I still had that liberal arts orientation to the world. Even though the department that I joined in 1982 was the Department of Chemical Engineering, I sought out different expertises. I mean, I was interested in surface chemistry, because reactions in the biological world happen at surfaces. That was important. I was interested in polymer science. I was interested in biological science and in the emerging field of molecular biology. So I don't think that the faculty or the staff at Lehigh have to do all the work. I think the students can naturally find different ways and different approaches and different interests to combine them on their own. And I hope that open architecture, perhaps, of disciplines is something that can benefit Lehigh University and certainly the College of Health.
So our former dean, David Wu, used to say that engineering is the new liberal arts. To do that, would you advise actually bringing the liberal arts point of view to and being less closeted, less narrow, broader? Is that what you're suggesting?
I absolutely would, and I remember David saying that many times. I served on his engineering advisory board and council for many years, and in fact, I was there when that council conceived of the College of Health. And actually, I was probably sitting next to Vince Lorenza at the time, actually, because Vince and I served at the board at the same time. So that's what kind of gave birth to this notion of, well, if Lehigh didn't have a medical school, how could it play in the health arena? And how does that transcendence exist in the traditional disciplines when you have a College of Business and a College of Arts and Sciences and a College of Engineering? So, at its roots, engineering, all the way back to Archimedes and Da Vinci, was that. It was what drove the Renaissance period. Nobody defined themselves as any one thing. They just kind of figured out how to do things. And I think that from that perspective, David is absolutely right that, engineering is a liberal arts type discipline.
So I have a very tough question for you in the Q&A. What are the top 1, 2, or 3 characteristics you would look for if you were on the hiring committee for the Forlenza chair in health innovation and technology?
Oh, well, because of the name of the chair, I think it would be somebody that mirrors the commitment, dedication, and values that Vince has had throughout his career. I mean, he's just a tremendous leader, not only of Becton Dickinson, but within the life science industry overall. But I think this is an important role for the university. I think you would consider, based on our discussion, somebody that thinks differently about these disciplines, is almost transcendent, is almost perhaps a person that's out of their own time period. It's a Leonardo da Vinci of today, let's say, who is genuinely curious about so many things and willing to explore them, but also being magnetic, I think, and attracting people that think equally differently, that can create that innovation ecosystem that we've been talking about. So it's somebody who's both comfortable not knowing and comfortable knowing, and can attract people who feel the same way. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the college and the university.
Well, we've taxed you. Oh, here's another question. Let me read this one out. A few questions, as time permits, from the technical entrepreneurship graduate class. So I'll read that out. What trends and associated opportunities have you seen with the corporate venture capital? What emerging synergies do you see for the AI and healthcare? That's a big one. Let me stop and let you respond to these.
Yeah, so it's a very insightful question, because when you think about venture capital, you typically think of Silicon Valley, and you typically think of Kleiner Perkins and company, and big established firms like that. In fact, most of the venture capital that's coming to the market today is corporate venture capital. So it means that companies are willing to use their balance sheets to look for innovation. So why would they do that? Well, there are 2 reasons. First reason is it could have attractive financial returns. Okay, and the second reason is it gives you an early look at technology, which could either contribute to your company's success or contribute to your company's demise. All right, and all those things are good to know early in the game, not late in the game. I mean, none of us want to be in the buggy whip business, when the automobile was coming around. And so large companies see that vulnerability to disruptive technology, and they want to know about it sooner. So that's I think going to be the ongoing role there. The convergence between macro industries like biotechnology and life sciences and data science or artificial intelligence, machine learning, all those domains is an important one. Okay, and you see it defined in different ways. It's called digital health. It's called the Internet of Things. All these definitions are part of the domain of where venture money is going today. And I think that the lessons learned of the pandemic that we already talked about, which is, better access to effortless technology like diagnostics, telemedicine, telehealth, are all going to play a role there. So it's a brave new world that I think is going to continue on. I don't think there's going to be anything that abates these opportunities, even if the pandemic winds down in the next couple of years. I think that will still be driving where innovation is coming from and where it's going.
Thanks. And the last question, what are your thoughts on non-competes as related to helping or hindering innovation across the healthcare industry?
Well, the old statement, where you stand depends on where you sit, right? So if you're a big company, you want non-competes, right? You don't want somebody going out and taking the knowledge they learned when they were an employee and competing against you. If you're on the entrepreneurial side of it, you don't want that. You want to be able to have the experience and then go out on your own if you need to and create your own innovation. So this is a bit of a cat and mouse game that's always been going on, right, between corporations and entrepreneurs. And I think you just need to be careful. I think, you know, it's important to take that seriously. When you sign that document, a non-disclosure and a non-compete, you should intend on abiding by it. I know when we present that to people, that's what we expect. And when we sign it, when we're in discussions and partnerships with other companies, we abide by it also. So I think trust is only based on the trustworthiness of the people involved in it. And I think that's you know, that's part of the reason that you know, business is done in an efficient way. So you know, one of the interesting things about companies and how they change over time is, you know, when they become older and more established and larger, they tend to do things that are more protective to them than they are exploratory. And I think that that's just a natural consequence of when you get bigger, you have more to lose, including, you know, significant portions of your business and a responsibility to your employees to keep the enterprise going. So I think you have to accept that as part of doing business, you know, wherever you are.
So we've kept you going, Steve, for a long duration. I think this is probably a good time to bring it to close. So I'll open it up for any final thoughts or questions. We've had several questions as we went along, so that was very good. It's been very illuminating, Steve. Thanks so much for sharing your time and your thoughts. And I have to admit, I wasn't quite sure about the format, but I think it worked out really well. But it takes a spontaneous speaker like you to make it work, Steve. So thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Anand. It's been my pleasure, Beth. Happy to be with you and your students and faculty and staff and colleagues.
Well,
So let me
again,
hand it back to Beth.
Yeah, I'll just add my thanks so much, Steve. That was really inspiring, future-looking. It's just fascinating, actually. So I think that I'm sure everyone on the call enjoyed it as well. So what I miss about talks and conversations like this is the ability to actually clap at the end all together, you know, when we're on Zoom. So, you know, we'll give you a hand. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank everybody who tuned in for joining us today. Wanted to remind everyone that they can attend on Friday at noon, the OR, if you heard something today or at one of our previous colloquia that really sparked a germ of an idea for you, join us to do a little design thinking to see where that could lead you. That could be really fun. And then I also just want to let everyone know that our next series, Colloquium series, starting in the spring, will focus on health policy and politics, and it's going to be celebrating the opening of the Institute for Health Policy and Politics in the College of Health, which we're really excited about. So hope you can join us for those. We don't have dates yet, but we'll get them out to everyone who's ever attended a colloquium of ours, and you'll be able to join us. So take care, everyone, and thank you so much. Also, if I did not thank you, Anand Jagota, thank you so much. Appreciate you being the interlocutor here. Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
My pleasure.
Bye all.
Happy